I'm going to guess that over the last few years, I've probably listened to well over 1,000 first meetings through being at companies and working with clients, things like that. One of the things that I find is that pretty much every team is reasonably good at asking questions around pains and problems, right? What do you have and how do you do this and things like that. Now, there's going to be variations there. Some people can get better. Obviously, the more junior folks, it's a very clunky conversation sometimes. The more senior folks are a lot more elegant. And some can usually get better about what they're doing, right? And for those ones, we want to give them the confidence and help them understand why we're asking these questions, help them practice a lot more, so it's more natural and they're at the point where they can actively listen as opposed to always just thinking about what their next question might be. And when we get those people who are a little bit clunky, they can build credibility and be more effective. But as I say, mostly that's what teams are doing pretty well right now. What I find is that few teams are confident and competent in having the conversation around if the prospect thinks the problem is worth solving. You know, why do they actually want to solve it? And then understanding the prioritization of this project. And for me, it becomes the so what, right? Okay, so we got a problem we've been talking about. We get all excited because it's the one that we solve, right? But for the prospect, it might be number 5 on their list, it might be number 1 on the list, or it might be 45 on their list of priorities to solve. And because they know it's a problem, but they've got much bigger things to fix or work on in the meantime, right? And we need to understand the impact of these problems. And sometimes what we have to do is, as a team, is we have to help them get good at driving a conversation towards impact as opposed to just understanding the facts and figures. What do you have? How long does it take? Things like that, right? If we understand impact, then we know whether there's a deal or not. And what's interesting about that conversation, when you hear an impact conversation happening, is often the prospect doesn't come to the call, say, well, here's the impact. I just know it off the top of my head, right? But we still need to ask the questions to maybe shine a light a little bit on their side about what they're doing. So they have a bit of a realization that might make them go and dig further and find out what's really happening in the background. When I work with teams on this, and I think it's super important, right? Because when we're converting more, we want to make sure that what's converting is high quality. The team often needs to change their mindset. We can give them 5 questions to get into impact, right? But most still don't do that. And it's to do with their mindset. Often they'll have a mental block where they don't believe they have the right to get into that. Look, I just talked to this prospect for the first time 20 minutes ago, and suddenly I'm getting into real business problem impacts and losses and then potentially personal impact and things like that. And they step back. I liken it to, walking up to the edge of the swimming pool and you dip your toe in, you might just ask one quick little impact question, then you could have back out a little bit, right? And I think what I find is the more seasoned and successful sellers are very comfortable about jumping right into the pool right from the outset and having a very different conversation. So for those that are not, we need to help them get confident and competent in having that impact-oriented conversation. And if I was to think about, the calls I listen to, most of the time, the conversation is about the situational things, the facts, the logic, things like that, about the problem or what they have and tech stacks and things like that. And very little of it is impact. And we need to flip that all the way around. One of the things that I do with teams to help them have a very different conversation is to encourage them and train them on how to build a value hypothesis, even before they go and talk on a first meeting. So let's say either inbound or outbound. You can do some research on the company you're about to meet with, and even sometimes if it's someone senior, the person, to figure out, well, what's the big things happening at this company? What's the CEO, if the CEO was stopped by an investor and said, what's the top 5 things that have to happen at the company this year? What would that person say? And then that gives us an idea about, well, what do we have, or how might our stuff help those projects, those initiatives come to reality? So this idea of a value hypothesis is very powerful. And in that first meeting, you can use it in a couple of different ways. You can actually lead with it, right? So let's say it's an outbound that got the meeting. Rather than start with a death by discovery, what do you have and how long have you had it and when's the renewal due and things like that? What if you said, look, I've done some research and I noticed that your CEO said that you're looking to expand the supply chain into Southeast Asia. I was curious and wondering how I don't know what, your security stuff might help enable that project to come to light, right? That's a very different conversation you're having rather than the death by discovery one, right? Or you can use it, just drop it into the conversation. It's like sometimes you get on these calls and the prospect's very tactical, right? They want to get into, do you have this feature or that feature or things like that, right? That's the level they're going to, and you want to figure out, well, how do I drive this up a lot higher? The value hypothesis is one way to do it, right? And that gives a very different type of conversation. And when I work with sales teams on changing how they do or helping them be more effective in a first meeting, I leave them with two thoughts, Joseph, right? So here's the first challenge I give them. I say, look, let's say you get that second meeting, and let's say it's in person at the prospect's office site, right? And you get in the elevator and it's going up to the 25th floor, whatever it might be, right? And just completely by chance, the CIO or the CEO gets in the elevator, right? And he or she takes one look at you and goes, "Oh, there's the vendor, right? You're wearing the vendor outfit. You got your khakis on and your jacket or whatever. If you're a dude, they go, okay, vendor's sitting right here, and they ask you, so what are you here to help us with, right? Which of these two answers would you rather give, right? Would you rather say, look, I'm here to sell you on our cloud security products so that you can improve your detection rate of public-facing buckets, or whatever it might be, data stores, so you don't get breached like others have in your industry, right? So would you rather say that, or would you rather say this? We're removing some of the security roadblocks that you have that are slowing down your big cloud migration project so that we help you hit your goal of expanding the supply chain into Southeast Asia, which I heard your CEO say on the earnings call happened 2 months ago, that it's a strategic imperative for 2024, right? Hopefully, people listening to this would say, I'd rather be able to say the second thing rather than the first thing, right? That's the first thing. But then it puts pressure on you to say, well, what do I do in that first call, that first meeting, to be able to answer that question like that, right? And that's a good mindset to think about. You're much better placed in your deal in all sorts of ways if you're operating at the helping the company in their transformation, as opposed to selling you a security product to take away some risk on some buckets, right? Very different thing. So that's one thought I leave people with. Another one I do, we talk about, is a couple of years ago, I think it was, I saw something where a CFO had been talking to, I think, a sales team about how to sell to the CFO or how to sell to companies in general. And one of the things that CFO said stuck with me. And they said, the purpose of the sales cycle is to build the business case for change. So the purpose of the sales cycle is to build the business case for change. And my first thought was, well, that's not what most of us think. The purpose of the sales cycle is to win a deal, right? But I think that when you think about that and you think about, well, that's what they are thinking about the sales cycle. That's what they're going through. They're trying to build up the knowledge, the case, the reasons why we're going to go through a transformation, a change in this area, whatever it might be. We want to make sure that all these things are set up so that it's looked at internally as helping the business actually succeed. And if you look at it like that, you approach those conversations with a very different mindset, right? That's the mindset to think about. And that's going to help in that first meeting with the right people want to work with you a little bit more if you approach them with that mindset, as opposed to them thinking, here's a product salesperson trying to sell me a product.